in connection with this, it's interesting to look at a passage from the Apology, which occurs just after Socrates relates the famous story about the oracle at Delphi, which this is a picture of the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. The priestess on her tripod would have sat right around here, and some people think that there were fumes coming out of the earth at exactly that place, which might have accounted for the ecstatic state and the puzzling things that the Pythia uttered. So in the context of telling the jury the story where his friend Chaerephon went to the oracle at Delphi and asked whether any man was wiser than Socrates, and the oracle replied that no one was wiser than Socrates. Socrates, of course, was puzzled by this because he didn't take himself to be wise, and so he took it to be his divine mission to go around and see whether he could find anyone wiser than himself, and mostly, as we know, the results were disappointing. But surprisingly, when it comes to the craftsman, he's actually willing to make an exception. So he says, "Finally, I went to the craftsman, for I was conscious of knowing practically nothing, and I knew that I would find that they had knowledge of many fine things. In this I was not mistaken. They knew things I did not know, and to that extent they were wiser than I. But gentlemen of the jury, the good craftsmen seem to me to have the same fault as the poets. Each of them, because of his success at his craft, thought himself very wise in other most important pursuits, and this error of theirs overshadowed the wisdom they had, so that I asked myself on behalf of the oracle whether I should prefer to be as I am, with neither their wisdom nor their ignorance, or to have both. The answer I gave myself and the oracle was that it was to my advantage to be as I am." So as this passage illustrates, despite the overall dismal assessment of Socrates in regards to the state of human wisdom, he does think that the craftsmen know many fine things which he doesn't know. And so Socrates is willing to allow that in this respect they are wiser than him. But where the error that they make is that they overshoot. So because they are successful at their crafts, they then falsely attribute to themselves lots of knowledge which they don't in fact have. And so he thinks, on balance, he comes out better than they do. However you may feel about this assessment, I think it's nevertheless clear that Socrates is not a skeptic with respect to the knowledge had by craftsmen, and since he thinks that virtue is a craft, we also have reason not to go for the dark, skeptical reading of Socrates. Okay, now let me sum up and remind you of where we've come from and where we've gone in this lecture. So our main and most general question was, why was Socrates brought to trial on the charge of impiety in 399 BC when he was 70 years old and sentenced to death by an Athenian jury consisting of 500 or 501 jurors? I mentioned many interesting and worthwhile questions, and I've only been able to comment on a few of them. In particular, I focused on claims in connection with the political interpretation, which has it that the official impiety charges trumped up and that the real reasons underlying his death were political. More specifically, this interpretation has it that either Socrates himself held anti-democratic, pro-oligarchic, pro-Spartan views, or that at least the Athenians thought he posed a threat to the democracy. The main body of evidence that I considered was Plato's portrayal of Socrates in the early dialogues, and I argued that we shouldn't read these texts as providing ammunition to the claim that Socrates himself harbored these anti-democratic sentiments. Rather, according to my reading, the Socratic mission is primarily moral and not political. Based on this investigation, we can now return to these two questions, which concern whether he deserved to die. First, was it reasonable for an Athenian juror in 399 BC to conclude that he deserved to die? And secondly, what should our attitude be looking at these events with the benefit of hindsight? And so, based on the evidence we've consulted today, it seems to me that we should conclude that it was perhaps understandable that the Athenians reacted the way that they did, but we shouldn't therefore also think that it was a reasonable verdict, because on my reading they essentially misinterpreted what Socrates was in fact up to, at least judging from the early Platonic dialogues. Thank you.